Welcome, everybody. Come on into our Zoom room. I'm going to wait just a couple minutes, maybe 1 or 2 minutes, to see all of our participants get in so that I have an idea of how many we have joining us this morning, and then we'll get started. So welcome. I hope you all are enjoying the IoH reunion. I don't know about you, but I have thoroughly enjoyed the sessions that I've been attending. I mean, they've really been quite remarkable. So I hope that they've been beneficial to you and to your families as well. I think it looks like we have a small group, and maybe the steady stream has stopped with all of them loading. So I'm going to do a few pieces of housekeeping real quick. And then we are going to get started. So if you want to look first, you'll have, oh, thank you, Peggy. You're so sweet. Thanks for joining us again. I appreciate you being here. If you look in the chat, Peggy's used it. And so she is already knowing how to use the chat. I don't know if you all can see it. She sent this one just to me. But if you look at the bottom, this is so that you'll know, so that if you do have something to share with everybody else, if you'll go ahead and click that blue button where it says chat and click all panelists and attendees. And once you do that, everybody will be able to see you. So Carol, I'm going to go ahead and give your shout out because not everybody saw it. I think it went to panelists, but you're from Loveland, Colorado, and you said hello. So thank you for joining us from there. I'm in Florida where it's hot. And so I'm a little bit jealous about the Colorado, I'll be honest with you. But I won't be jealous of you, Carol, when it is snowing there. So I think I might be okay with that. But thank you for joining us. Again, participate in the chat. I would love to have you do that. Feel free to ask questions in the chat. And if I see them, I will absolutely address them. So again, if you'll just put all panelists and attendees, and you can say hello to each other. You might even make some connections with other people that have been at your previous retreats. So I love seeing all this. Thank you so much for participating. If for some reason you get logged out, please feel free to jump back in. Just click the same link. It looks like Brian. Oh my goodness, Brian. I work in Lakeland. I actually am a dean at Southeastern University. So, and Christina, who's saying hello, is from there too. So this is super exciting to see you. We could have had this chat at Starbucks outside and taken COVID precautions, but here we are. So this is great. Thank you so much for being here. So what we're going to talk about today is helping your kids and teens cope with grief. And so whether you've already experienced a loss in your family, or you or your loved one is dealing with illness right now, our kids and even us as adults experience something called preparatory or anticipatory grief, which means we sometimes have grief even before a death occurs or another type of loss occurs in our lives. So we're going to talk through how to help kids and teens. I'm actually super excited. I'm going to share with you one of my very favorite activities that you can do as a family. We'll do that at the end. And another thing that I'm going to do today is I get a lot of questions about love after loss and how do we explain things to kids and what do our hearts do when we love people and then we've experienced great loss. And so I'm going to draw something for you to help you be able to help your children and your teenagers. So I'm really excited for the next hour and a half together. I hope this can be interactive. And we're going to do something in the beginning so that we can kind of get to know each other. So again, if you type in the chat, I see a few of you, your chats are going to all panelists. So make sure you click all panelists and attendees so that everybody can make that connection and see what you're typing. Otherwise, it's just the panelists. That's me, Stephen from IoH, Kelly from IoH, and then Christina who works with me. So we want to make sure we can all see it. So if you're just joining us, type all panelists and attendees. All right, are you guys ready to get started? If I could see you, I think you'd be giving me a thumbs up. So I'm hoping that this is a thumbs up. First, I want to say oh, Rachel raised her hand. Thank you, Rachel. That's a yes then. First, I just want to tell you how grateful I am to be here. I am so thankful for Inheritance of Hope and for the work that this organization does. I have spent my career doing grief counseling and now researching grief and teaching about it. And especially childhood grief is very, very close to my heart. It's something that I'm very passionate about, helping kids through this process. And so I'm really excited to share with you today and to also see you all share with each other so that you're best able to support your children during this process. So let's start out without further ado. Let's talk real quick, and then I'm going to get some of your thoughts about what's hard for you to help your children. Let's talk about the distinctions between childhood, really, responses to loss, and adult responses to loss, because there are some unique distinctions. To start out, the literature often refers to children as forgotten mourners. And what this means is, if you've noticed, you've been around a teenager, sometimes they don't say anything at all. They act like they're just fine. And little kids sometimes will just keep playing and doing all the fun things they always did. And so often their caregivers, whether it be their teachers, their principals, their after-school care providers, their football coaches, their ballet teachers, and maybe even sometimes their parents, we forget that they really are still experiencing grief because they have this amazing ability to play and to go about what they were doing. But I want you to think about how as adults, we have that ability too, don't we? Sometimes we do things to avoid or distract ourselves from our feelings. Sometimes we, might go to work to get our mind off of things for a little bit and take a break. And so children's work is their play. And that's how they process. And so if you did not see, I think Inheritance of Hope is going to make some of the recordings. I hope I'm not speaking out of turn, but Stephen will correct me if I am. But I think they're going to make some of the recordings available to you all if you weren't able to go to some sessions. And there was just one about feelings not being problems by Krista St. Germain that was amazing. And it will definitely help you as well. She talks about a lot of the stuff that I talk about, and I think it will really help you with how your children experience their emotions and how you do as well. So if you didn't watch that one, that would be a great one as well to participate in later. So we know too that kids are impacted by their cognitive development. So how they process loss and how they understand loss is different depending on their developmental age. So some of you may have children in your home who have special needs or cognitive delays. So anytime if I use like an age, please know I'm referring to their developmental age, not just to their chronological age, because that can be very different for children. And I love Peggy. Yes, we're going to talk about that. How adults, actually, I have a whole portion where we're going to talk about how adults can actively guide their children and help them through the process. So for sure. Part of that is because, as you see on the slide, children are greatly impacted by adults, and they're impacted by how we choose to either allow or avoid our emotions. And so we're going to talk about why it's so important to model healthy mourning behaviors for our children. And when you hear me say mourning, I want to make a distinction. If you were in my prior presentation, you heard me say this, but grief and mourning are slightly different. And when we really recognize the difference, it helps us understand which one we want to do, right? So grief is our internal thoughts, feelings, and reactions following a loss or an anticipated loss. And it's actually defined in the dictionary as deep sorrow, right? Our grief is deep sorrow. But mourning is defined as the act of sorrowing. Do you see that? The act of sorrowing. It's where, as some people call it, grief gone public, right? It's where those grief reactions, the internal thoughts, feelings, and reactions that we have come to the outside. And so mourning is actually the treatment or how we help heal in the grief process. It's by allowing ourselves to feel and process those emotions. And that's sort of what was talked about in the last seminar that I just referenced and some of what we'll talk about today. And I already mentioned how kids use play to cope. And so sometimes they use actions instead of words, and we have to decode those. The other thing is that our teenagers, especially starting like middle school, if you remember, well, I think most people remember middle school. And most of us, if we could choose a time to go back to it, probably wouldn't be middle school. And if yours is middle school, yay for you. You had an amazing and very uncommon experience in middle school. If that's the social group you would choose to go back to, right? So this is where egocentrism begins. So when you think about children's responses, if you're living with anybody who is in middle school age or older, you're going to know that sometimes it seems like the whole world revolves around them, because egocentrism means self at center. So they really worry about how a loss is going to impact them personally. And they also worry, there's this thing called an imaginary audience that happens. This is where, and if you go back for a second to middle school, you will remember if you had a pimple on your forehead, it was like you just couldn't go to school that day, or you knew if you went, whenever somebody said, oh, you look pretty today, you'd think, oh yeah, right, they just noticed that pimple, right? Because you think everyone is looking at you. It's an imaginary audience that's not really looking. So what happens when we have a family member who has an illness or who dies is that sometimes kids that age then begin to be very affected by that. Like, oh my goodness, I don't want everybody to know I'm different. I had one little boy tell me, I said, hey, but I think it'd be helpful if I talked to some of your teachers and about your dad's death. And he said, well, you can talk to my teachers, but you can't tell them my dad died. I don't want anybody to know. And I said, well, I think a lot of them do know already. He said, nope, they would treat me totally different if they knew. Well, of course, his teachers did know. I was actually sent by the school. The school called me to see him, but he just worried that something would be different if people know. So as we talk about what kids experience, just keep that in mind, that their development matters. And their peer relationships and the change that sometimes a loss causes to their social status makes a big difference depending on the age that they are. So, for example, if we now have to change schools or move out of our house, or now the primary breadwinner in their family is gone, and now we are having to make up for that loss of financial income, and now I can't hang in the same social circles at school that I did before. So kids have the primary loss and the grief that they're experiencing, but they have a lot of these secondary losses as a result too. Okay. So let me ask you a few questions so that we can see if some of you here on this call today have similar concerns, and this will help me know how to help you. So there are 3 questions to this quiz. You can only pick one answer, and I'm going to allow our panelists to vote too. And I'm going to go ahead and launch this poll, and then I'm going to show you the results to it. So if you look, it should be, sometimes if you're on your phone, you have to pull the drop down menu down. But you should see right now on your screen a poll with 3 questions asking about what it's like to be a part of a family with a grieving child or teen. And if it doesn't apply to you because you don't have a grieving child or teen in your home, then you just don't have to answer. I can't tell who answers or who doesn't. I can just tell how many of you participate. So I'll wait until I see that most of you have completed the quiz, at least over half of you, and then we'll go ahead and share the results with each other and talk about them. So I see that I have over half of you so far, but I'm going to give it a few more minutes because I think it looks like a couple more are taking the poll. Okay, I'm going to leave it open for about 30 more seconds, and then I'll go ahead and close it. And if you weren't able to take it, it's okay. I think you'll still benefit from being able to see the responses so that we know. Sometimes it's helpful to know we're not the only people experiencing certain things in our families. Grief can be very isolating. I'm actually going to share on that tomorrow afternoon. And we're going to talk about ways that we can cope and support ourselves through the process. But we know that isolation, especially amid a pandemic, can make it tough. So I'm hoping this will help you see that you're not alone. So I've ended it. I'm going to share the results. If you can't see them, I was told in the last session, you do sometimes have to go to a drop down and pull down a green bar if you're on your phone. But hopefully you should be able to see the poll results now in front of you. And so to the first question, at times, I've wondered what my grieving child or teen is feeling or thinking. And it looks like the majority of you It looks like over 93% of you taking the quiz strongly agreed or agreed with that statement. And I'm thankful actually to see one disagree. That might be that you have really great open communication and that your child is really telling you how they're feeling, which is awesome. But it's very common in families to wonder, what is the other person thinking or feeling? And some ways we respond to our children and our children respond to us because they're wondering what we're thinking or feeling, or we're worried about bringing it up in front of the other person. At times I've wondered if I'm doing the right thing to help my grieving child. And it looks like all of you who participated did say, yeah. At times I've wondered if I'm doing the right thing, strongly agree or agree. And some days being a grieving family can be pretty tough. And 100% of you who took the quiz said, yep, that's true. And I would agree. And so I just want you to know now that I am very, very thankful to be here with you today, to be able to share. And my prayer is that after this session, we're able to feel a little bit lighter and maybe a little bit more validated, and that you're better equipped as well to help your families through this process. So that's my goal today. So there are some questions that a lot of kids will ask after a death loss. And by the way, they ask this sometimes after a diagnosis as well. So if you're here because you're still living through this diagnosis and illness, then I just want you to know that these questions most likely are going to impact your children as well. Kids don't always ask these though out loud. Just know that these are some things that as parents and caregivers, we want to think about addressing with the children and teens under our care. So, things like, how in the world did this happen? And is it going to happen to me? Is it going to happen to someone else I love? How is this going to impact me now? Did I do something to cause this? Or really, could I have done something to have prevented this from happening? And who is going to take care of me? And so as you kind of process with children, these are questions that we want to make sure that we answer whether or not they ask them. Okay. Now, I want to tell you real quick, there's a center, and Christina will have a list of links that she'll place in the end. So make note, one of them is from the Dougie Center, which is the National Center serving children and teens. And there's also a center, which I'll give you at the very end, called the National Alliance for Grieving Children. Both the Dougie Center and the National Alliance for Grieving Children have great resources for you. And one of the things that the Dougie Center has is called a Bill of Rights for Grieving Teens. And so I want to tell you where these things we want adults to know about their grief came from. I showed up to my support group one night that I was facilitating, and the teenagers in the room were ticked off. And, they just weren't having it. They'd had a bad week, clearly. They were frustrated with their grief. They were frustrated with their parents. And I said, wow, let's pull up the Bill of Rights for Grieving Teens from the Dougie Center. And so I pulled it up and we started reading it. And I said, have any of your rights been violated? And the teenagers started saying, yeah, this one and this one and this one. And I said, okay. And I said, it sounds like, and they started saying things like, the adults don't understand this. My parent doesn't know this. My mom doesn't understand this. My grandma doesn't know this. And what I learned, by the way, happened that night in group is that while we were talking about this, a counselor was meeting with the adults as well. And the same conversation was happening among the adults. The adults were saying things like, my teenager's just fine and I'm still upset, or they're not helping out around the family when I need them to. And everybody was struggling on that particular week. So I didn't know that was happening in the other room, but I asked my teenagers, I said, it sounds like you have some stuff that adults need to know about your grief. There are things that adults need to know about your grief that they clearly don't know. So I said, I'd love it if you could write some of those down for me. What are some of the things you want adults to know? So I gave them note cards and they wrote down all the things they wanted adults to know about their grief. And so I actually have them to read to you. I want to read to you some of the things that they said. And I want to preface this by saying that when they were done writing all these down, they know that I travel the country and talk about grief with mental health practitioners and survivors. And so they said, well, what are you going to do with these, Miss Erica? And I said, well, I'm going to, I'll definitely put them on a PowerPoint presentation or I'll share them with people. And they said, we don't mean when you go present, we mean right now. What are you going to do with these right now when we walk out of that room and we see the people who bring us to group? And I said, well, what do you want me to do? And they said, can you read them out loud? And I said, do you want me to do that? And they said, yeah. So I stood in a circle with grieving teens and younger children too, and their parents, surviving parents and caregivers. And I read these things that I'm going to read to you. And there wasn't a dry eye in the house. And what I realized in that moment was the adults were feeling a lot of the same things. It's just everybody kind of walks on eggshells sometimes in a family when we're going through a crisis, like a loss or an illness. And so hopefully some of these are freeing to you. I have a feeling you might have even heard some of them, and some of you might even be feeling them for yourself. So I'll share with you a few of their responses. Things like, let me talk to you and others about the person who died. Even though time passes, it sometimes feels like it just happened moments ago. I get angry easily now. I'm entitled to feel angry and sad at times. I loved that one. I get distracted in class by thinking about it. I feel guilty for many things. I loved the person who died the most. And that was a child who just felt so connected and was living with grandma and just really missed mom. I think I'm coping better than some adults. That's what one of my teenagers said. And I think that was true. Please consider my feelings about dating again or remarriage. Don't expect me to be fine overnight. I'm hurt and it seems like you don't care. It's not easy to grieve. Our families should be getting closer, but sometimes I feel like we're getting further apart. I wish I was there when my person died. I wish I could hear their voice again. I wish I could talk to the person again. I wish this all never happened. I wish the person was still here to give me wisdom. Now I bet, and feel free to write in the chat, I bet some of you as adults are thinking, well, I felt a lot of the same things that these kids are feeling, right? And I don't share these with you for us to feel sad or sorry for our children. What they're feeling are normal human responses to loss. These kids were provided the opportunity to share it. And they did. And it was liberating for some of them. It was freeing. They were able to take a burden off because they were given voice, right? So that's what we're going to talk about, is how can we honor some of these emotions that our kids experience. And so before we start, I want to remind you the word emotion has what word in it? Motion. That means feelings require movement. I said this in my prior session. Our grief reactions require movement, and so we have to mourn them. We have to get them from the inside to the outside. I loved what the presenter in the last session I attended said. She talked about it almost being like a beach ball. And I know you all can experience that in the water when you try to push that ball down. When we try to push our feelings down and down and down, what happens? It pops back up again. Push it down, pops back up again. So even when we attempt to avoid or numb our feelings or distract ourselves, right, they're still there just below the surface. And the minute we let off of that, what's going to happen? It pops up. So the emotions that I'm going to talk about are normal. They're human responses. They are beautiful emotions that God has given us, and none of these are bad or good. They just are, and they're very common after loss. So what we want to do as adults, and I'll share this with you in just a minute after you see this slide, is we're going to talk about, okay, now that we know these are emotions, how do we actually help our kids through it and help our kids process these? So remember, feelings have one goal in life: to be felt, okay? So here are some of the most common grief reactions experienced by children and adults, but these are specifically for children, and you're gonna see some things on here that you don't typically see when we talk about adults, okay? So things like regressive behaviors, all right? So if you don't know what this is basically when kids are under, really any humans, when any humans are under psychological distress, but especially children, we have this desire, again, God created us so magnificently, right, to even protect ourselves. And so we have this desire to return to a place where we felt safe and secure. And so sometimes our behaviors regress. Let me give you common examples. A child who really stopped sucking her thumb a year ago, all of a sudden is sucking her thumb again since daddy got diagnosed with cancer. Or maybe a a little girl who has not wet the bed in years now all of a sudden is wetting the bed at night again and didn't before, or now they want to sleep in your bed quite a bit, or there's a struggle to get ready for school in the morning. And if you've had children experience this, I would love for you to type that in the chat, because I think others might benefit from knowing, oh, okay, somebody else had this happen too, not just me. But we definitely see this. I've seen kids hold the door handle of the car and refuse to go to school because, remember that question on a prior slide, they're afraid it might happen to somebody else and they don't want to go to school and have it happen when they're not able to be there and protect, right? So that's a regressive behavior. They'll take on the sick role. They'll have baby talk. They refuse to do their homework all of a sudden. Forget it, right? And a lot of times we associate these behaviors with very young children. But I had a college student once that was experiencing a major trauma in her life, and she started sucking her thumb again. I would see her sucking her thumb in my class. And that was a red flag to me, that she's experiencing something where her body is trying to protect itself, and it's trying to take her back to a place where she felt safe. So let me tell you about these regressive behaviors. If you take it away, the child will find a new one to replace it. So what you need to do is, the regressive behavior is just the child's way of communicating to you. Okay, so I see like 12-year-old wants to sleep with me on the weekend. Absolutely, right? So sometimes that's because you feel safe and secure, or wanted you to go everywhere with him. Sometimes we have to have really creative interventions. Let me tell you one that I did once. I had a little girl who was afraid to go to school. And it was really to the point where her teacher said, even when she's here, she's so filled with anxiety, there's really no point in her even being here. The teacher's like, I've never even seen a child like this before. But this young woman's father died by suicide while she was at school. And so she was particularly terrified of something happening again. And so what we had to do is we actually devised a system of check-ins for her, where she would actually go to the office to check on her mom. So her mom had a certain time frame. She would call the office, and then the little girl would come up later and they'd say, oh, your mom called. She said to eat all your, sandwich for lunch, and she'll check in the afternoon. We had to do that because the little girl was so afraid of someone else dying in her life that she wasn't able to focus. Sometimes what parents do is we say, I promise I'll be fine. And let me just say this, if you've said that, this seminar cannot be a seminar where then we take in a thought and we have this regret, feel like, oh my goodness, now I've failed as a parent. No, you haven't. You all are doing tremendous jobs as parents. And you might say, well, you don't know me, but I do know you, because here you are, right? Here you are in a seminar to find out how to help your children, which means to me, you're doing a remarkable job. Even on the days where you feel like you failed, you're doing a remarkable job, okay? Maya Angelou says, when we know better, we do better. And so now, right, if we've learned, okay, well, what can I say instead, right? We can't make promises to our children because we don't know. But what we can say is, mommy will do everything possible to keep herself safe. And what can we do to try to help our children feel safer when they're at school or when they're away from us? I love that. Yeah, Jamie's saying that Aubrey called from school every day when Eric was sick. She just needed to know. I don't blame her, because I think I would want to know too. If you were in my prior seminar, you know that my husband lives with a chronic illness and has frequent hospitalizations and surgeries and things like that. And I am the person who is like sleeping on that bed. I don't like him being there without me. And I'm a grown adult, right? So of course, then what did my daughter do as she was growing up? She would want check-ins all the time too when her daddy was in the hospital, of course. And she's grown now, she's in college. And I think she'd still feel the same way, right? So absolutely, I love seeing these comments. These are beautiful. The other thing that happens when kids are younger, and by the way, textbooks say this just happens to kids, but you all will know this as well as I do. It happens to adults too, and it's called magical thinking. And this is when we think there's something we could have done or we should do to prevent the loss or the illness from occurring. So as adults, we do it this way to ourselves. It really is guilt, and guilt is really anger turned inward, right? When we're upset with ourselves. And so we say things like, or kids might say things like, one little boy said to me, he was struggling after his father died, and his dad died suddenly, so no one had prepared him at all for this loss. And he said, well, when my daddy left last night, he said, if I said my prayers and brushed my teeth, he'd see me in the morning, and I forgot to brush my teeth. So because this little boy doesn't understand why death happens, he thinks, oh my goodness, duh, I just need to brush my teeth and daddy will come back. So that's really how magical thinking starts. But as adults, we do it too. We say, I should have made her go to the doctor sooner, or I could have done this. So it really is just regret. But for our young children who don't understand loss, sometimes it makes them feel responsible, like they did something. So this is where we want to take the time to really explain illness to our children, even when it seems scary, to seek support from other people to explain it so that they know that it's not something that they did that caused it. Now, difficulty concentrating and confusion. I talked about that in my last seminar, but I don't know how many of you were there. I'll say this. A little boy said it to me like this: Miss Erica, I think my brain fell out. And I thought, what a beautiful way of explaining it, because that is exactly what it feels like. It's a lot of information for our brains to take in at one time. And our brains have to be able to process the loss. And so the way that it does that is by talking about it, writing about it, it's getting it out. So if you think about it, I'll give you the analogy I gave in my last session, but our brains work on input, processing, output, right? And so it takes in information, it processes it, and it spits it out. But just like a computer, when we click on it too many times and we do too much input at once, it freezes. And that's what happens when we give it input about an extraordinary illness, a life-limiting illness, or a death. It's too much for our brains to take in for a period of time, and they kind of shut off. And yet with children, guess what we do? We expect them to go right back to school and learn math and science and all of these things. And yet we know as adults, we go back to work and we just stare at the computer and we think we can't even make it through the day, right? So we have to know that this is a normal occurrence. So sometimes we see kids' grades go up. Sometimes we see their grades go down. The going up is sometimes because they're working over, being overly productive to not necessarily feel all these emotions. We see this sometimes in middle school or teenagers. And then sometimes our decrease in grades is just because they're really struggling to focus. Mood changes. Sadness is really the pervading emotion that people say they feel after a loss. Anger or acting out is common, especially among older elementary and middle school boys, because they're getting all that new testosterone as well, which already makes them, I mean, if you talk, and I know we have males on this session as well, how many people, if I asked all of my 40-something-year-old male friends, how many of you damaged your hand at some point hitting a wall in your childhood or something that you shouldn't have hit? A lot of people would say, oh, me, right? Because of that, we have these hormones and we don't know what to do with them. And then as well, really our anger is just survival oriented at this point for kids. Remember, it's a defensive mechanism. It's like, too much is changing. Why is somebody sick in my house? I can't have any more change. So I become very resistant to it. And that can be directed toward anyone or anything. And so for some of you who have to make major decisions to move houses or change schools or things like that, and you're really kind of being faced with a lot of acting out, it's just a way to try to regain control over a situation where kids feel so out of control. And sometimes they're mad at just in general the loss. They might be mad at God. They might be frustrated with all kinds of things, just as you might have been as adults. And we know as well, it can be very scary for kids. So there can be a lot of fear involved and anxiety. I see Danielle saying how she has to reassure her children every day, wanting to know appointments and scans, and even whenever you're done. I love, Danielle, that you're saying that you're keeping that line of communication open. That's what we're going to talk about on the next slide. You're doing a beautiful, beautiful job with that, because that's what kids need. They need that open communication. It helps to mitigate some of the fear and anxiety that they're experiencing. In addition, they might have grief bursts. These are the things that we have as adults where we just all of a sudden, we think we're having a fine day and the grief just hits us. And for kids, they get a lot of physical symptoms of their feelings. So we know what these are. Right before you give a big presentation, maybe you feel nervous, a little sick to your stomach. That's a physical symptom of your anxiety that you're feeling. Kids get tummy aches a lot of times. So if you have kids getting sent home with stomach aches a lot or headaches, that's usually just kind of a little, I view it as like kids, Yeah, God must have known that they wouldn't be as verbal to describe to us the feelings yet. So it's sort of like them sticking up their hand and saying, hey, me over here, this tummy ache isn't really a tummy ache, right? I just need to tell you that this is all really hard right now for me. And so I'm going to show you by saying that I have a tummy ache. So again, that's where as adults, we have to kind of decode the meaning of that. And even sleep problems, you know, a lot of people assume that young children, like infants, don't actually grieve or mourn. And that's not true. If a child has the capacity to love, which means they have been born, they have the capacity to mourn. I had a good friend who was a grief counselor with me who died. And his wife, they had two older children, but they had a baby, an infant. I think he was about 8 months old whenever my friend Jamie died. And that baby, so Jamie did everything in the middle of the night. He was like, if we have a baby, I'll do everything. And Lois believed him, and it was true. He really did. And his baby, for a period of time, would wake up in the middle of the night, pull himself up to the edge of the crib, and just scream. And he was screaming for his daddy because his daddy's the one who did the middle of the night shifts. And when my friend Lois would go in to hold her baby, he would thrash away. He did not want his mommy. You're going to learn, right? Death severs a physical attachment and bond, but it does not ever sever our emotional one. The people that we love live within us forever. They are a part of us. That's legacy. That's what inheritance of hope is about. That is the beauty of love. And so this little boy really wanted his daddy. And so my friend said, what am I supposed to do? He refuses comfort. I said, well, you're going to go in every night and you're going to try to pick him up, and he's going to thrash away. And then you're just going to set him back in that crib, and you just sit down next to his crib where he can see you, and you cry yourself to sleep while he cries himself to sleep. And she said, all right, that's a plan. And that's what she did. And she did that for about a week. And then at some point, her baby, who by the way is now a teenager and is thriving, her baby decided at some point that mommy could comfort me again in the middle of the night. You know, mommy could comfort all during the day, but he was protesting. So just know, right, when even our youngest ones can still feel the loss because they recognize the absence, but that also is the beauty of love, and that we have love in our lives. And so these are some of the common reactions. All right, now let's figure out how we help them. So I'm already seeing Danielle and some of the other participants who are typing in, talking a lot about encouraging the open conversations and dialogue. I'm going to provide a list again of resources at the very end. So as I start to close, Christina will post those for you. So just make sure you're ready to kind of copy and paste those. And these will be resources to try to just give you some extra assistance for your children. But we know in families, the National Alliance for Grieving Children did a study on children and families who were grieving. And what they found is that a majority of them, they all said it was very common to avoid conversations about the illness or the death because they didn't want to upset each other, right? It's kind of that all walking on eggshells that I talked about a little while ago. So a lot of times kids will fear, well, I don't want to bring up mom to dad because then he might start crying or he might be upset. And the adults say the same thing. So let's talk about that. It's really healthy sometimes to say to your children ahead of time, there will be times that you will bring up my illness or you will bring up your dad's death. And it will probably make me cry. But the truth is, it's not because you brought it up. It's probably because I was sitting on this couch wanting so desperately to get these feelings out, but holding them in, and you engaging the conversation has given me permission to share my heart and what I'm feeling. So to help your older kids understand that, for younger kids to tell them, it's okay for us to be upset. It's okay for mommy or daddy to cry right now, because when we love someone so deeply and we miss them or we worry about them if they're ill, it's natural for us to feel some of these emotions like sadness. So we often try not to cry in front of our children as well. But I want you to remember in Krista's last session when she said feelings are not problems, I thought that was beautiful, because we do not have to be strong for our children. In fact, modeling healthy behaviors, it teaches our kids healthy ways to ventilate their emotions. It teaches them that emotions are okay, they're normal parts of life, and God created us as humans to have them. But when we're silent or we repress our emotions, then we also teach our children that as well. We teach them that it's not okay to share those feelings, and it's not okay to talk about them. I want to pause for a minute because I see a couple questions, and one came just to the panelists, but it says, what about children who don't seem to want to grieve? He says he's dealt with it already. His dad was sick for 3 years and changed a lot. Yeah, so that's important. If it's a teenager, so I'll say this, avoidance of, or completely avoiding all emotion or not talking about it at all sometimes can be a red flag that they're not coping very well or allowing all of those emotions in. But the other thing too, to the person who wrote to me separately about that, I think that sometimes we have to recognize also you're doing the right thing to be patient and realize that sometime he will need to work through it. The interesting thing about feelings is we can run from them, but we can't hide. They're always kind of waiting for us. If it's a teenager, which I don't know, if you can message me separately or to all panelists and attendees, and I know, Joy, if it's a teenager or a younger child, that will help. But sometimes our 14, yep, that's textbook right there. So sometimes it's just a not wanting to show emotions, not willing to share emotions. And also because he did cope, he kind of dealt with 3 years of illness. And so some of this could just be that he processed some already, but I think a lot of it might be that it just might be a little bit difficult at his age too. So teenagers especially will sometimes choose to try to hide their emotions, particularly teenage boys. And the other thing is sometimes as parents, we send messages, and I don't know if your husband ever did this, but we say things. This is the adult responsibility part where we say, you're going to be in charge now. We need you to be strong for your mom. Sometimes these conversations even happen on the sidelines and we don't know that they happened. And so that can sometimes contribute to these feelings, but you're very smart to respect space and maybe try to get him, if he's willing, an opportunity where he might be able to be around other kids his age who have experienced loss. Some ways to do that, and the National Alliance for Grieving Children site has grief centers throughout the country listed, as well as grief camps. If we have time at the end of today, and I don't know that we will, but I can show you a quick video about a grief camp that we have in my community, just to give you an idea for what's out there for your kids if you haven't already experienced it. Yes, people said, oh, I'm so afraid I'll make you cry. Yeah, what they didn't know is you were already speaking his name felt freeing. That's so true. I love Martin family. You said you cry a lot, and there's nothing wrong with that. That is absolutely wonderful to do. Again, it's a way of getting our emotions out. And some people even say, tears can be healing. It's kind of washing for us and cleansing in a way. We want to think about, for our kids, especially our teenagers, to discourage too much adult responsibility. So here's what I tell people. In families, we have to take on different roles when someone's sick or when someone dies. We just have to. That's how life works, right? We're running an operation in most of our homes. And so that means now you've got to take out the trash, and now you've got to do this, and I need help, and that's okay. But what we don't want to do is cause children to feel like they have to take on all of the responsibility, particularly the responsibility for the emotional support in the family, right? We want to make sure to say we all have to pitch in, we've all got to help. But if we see too much adult responsibility, we want to make sure we let them be kids. This is most common in teenagers, and it's most common in teenage girls. You'll see them start to take on the role, especially if mom dies or if mom is sick. That's sometimes when you'll see that they start to take on, and people will say, you're such a little mama. And they really affirm that in them, which again, it's beautiful that we all learn how to contribute, but we don't want to rob somebody of their childhood. So we want to be careful. And sometimes it's them trying to be strong. We also do want to foster mutual respect. So when I mentioned a little bit ago, we have to give our kids space too. I have had some kids say to me, all they want to talk about is this, and I just need a break from it. In just a minute, I'm going to share with you too. You'll see how sometimes kids are thinking about it, but not saying it out loud. So we have to give them other opportunities to share, and I'll give you some ideas for that. Um, let's see, I want to make sure that I don't miss any of what you're saying. Okay, perfect. And then, oh, I've got to hit on this, provide structure and boundaries. Because I've worked with so many families who have experienced loss or are facing illness, I hear sometimes things like, well, we've eased up a little bit because I feel so sorry that he's having to go through all this, or I feel sad for them that they have to do this. Here's the important thing, right? For example, anger is a normal response to loss. I've had families actually get yelling pillows where they actually like get a pillow and they write on it screaming pillow or a yelling pillow, and it has to be like in a bedroom, a spare room, or in a closet. And if the kids start yelling or screaming because they're mad, for example, I had one mom and she would say, "It is okay to be mad. I am mad too that your dad died. This isn't okay. I'm just as upset as you are. But it's not okay for you to scream at me because you're hurting my ears. You're taking your feeling and you're putting it on me. And you need to ventilate your emotion in a healthy way. So if you want to go scream into the pillow where you're still getting your emotions out, but you're not hurting other people, you're not being destructive to other people, because we have to teach our children, again, the emotions come out, right? They're like volcanoes, but we have to teach them how to get them out in constructive and healthy ways instead of destructive ways. And so screaming into people's faces is destructive. Hitting people is destructive. But yelling into a pillow or thinking about some other things we can do, right? There's other things we can do to ventilate our anger in healthy ways is important. But we do still have to have boundaries. So in my last presentation, I talked about my mother-in-law, who was a good mother-in-law. I told you all I had a really good one, and I hear there are bad ones out there, but I was real fortunate. And she was one of my life's greatest cheerleaders. And, you know, when she died, things changed. And my daughter was 4.5 at the time. And so when her Grandy Sally died, suddenly was trying to comprehend and understand what happened. And I remember one day, and the moms and dads in the room, I think you'll relate to this. Okay, we were in the grocery store and it happened to just be a hard day. It was a hard grief day for me. I could tell it was for her, and she was only 4.5. She wasn't acting herself. My husband was having a bad day. Everybody felt the grief this day. And she hit me in the grocery store. Okay. And I remember they like, because here's the thing that you all have to acknowledge too. If you're also grieving, anticipatory grief or after the loss grief, right? We are not at our emotional capacity is being stretched already. And then she hit me. And I said, I remember just breathing because I'm thinking, well, I am in public, right? I have to be. I said, listen, it is okay to be mad. I am so mad too right now. I've had a bad day and I miss your Grandy Sally. I miss her coming over. I miss her snuggles. I miss her hugs. But it is not okay to take your anger out on me. It is not okay to hit other people when we are mad. That is unacceptable. And there will be consequences for this, right? So I'm not dismissing her behavior because she's grieving. I'm still setting the boundaries and providing that structure, but I'm explaining, I can relate to this emotion. Here's where you've crossed the line, right? So we don't give kids a free pass because sometimes that can be really hard to rein in. And that's very important to emphasize because these kids, again, kids are very resilient, but they need structure and they need boundaries always, especially when our family is experiencing a difficulty. And then we also want to provide them opportunities for memorialization or remembrance. And so I want to talk about with the holidays coming up and some ways you can help create legacy or you can help extend legacy as well if your loved one has already died. And so let's talk about what that might be. Sometimes I've seen families who put ornaments on their trees. You can actually get clear ornaments and you can put, and by the way, this is a great legacy project if your family is still living with illness. What you can do is you can write messages. So like, let's say, for example, I know we have a mom on here who was talking about telling her children about treatment and things like that. I forget, I just forgot your name, Danielle, I think it is, right? And so that would be a way that we could write, we could say, you could write messages to your children inside of these ornaments that we put up. We can do memory ones. Another really neat thing that I've seen families do is they get a shoebox and they wrap it like a present. but they put a little slit in the top, and they do this usually from like Thanksgiving until Christmas. And sometimes I have families who do this all year. They actually leave it up all year round, and they put their favorite memories of the person, or they'll put their favorite stories of the year, things that they don't want to forget. So as we have those memories while we're driving in the car or something like that, we come home, we write it down, we put it in the box. And then on special dates, on anniversaries or holidays, the families open up that box together and read through those. And it's a really beautiful way to honor our loved ones, and also to help create and foster legacy. So those are some neat ways. I'll have Christina again at the end, or even now, Christina, if you want, put some of the resources. The other one I haven't mentioned that I'm going to put in the chat and give to you is that Sesame Street, actually, if you have young children, Sesame Street has beautiful resources on their website to help families, including videos, and they explain all types of loss to children, and they even have really cool activities that you can participate in with your children. So if you have younger children, I would say probably 7 and under, the Sesame Street website can be a great resource for you. In addition, I've included some resources on my favorite grief journals for teens called Fire in My Heart, Ice in My Veins, and A Child Remembers for younger kids. So you can copy and paste these links out to help your families. Okay, now continuing bonds is kind of part of that memorialization process that I talked about earlier. And this is a way, if you think about it, as I mentioned, loss severs our physical attachment, but it doesn't sever our emotional bond. And so the attachment theorist John Bowlby taught us, if you remember from probably like a class you had in high school, an intro to psych class or something, he taught us that attachment is primal and instinctual. And our whole lives revolve around the intimate attachments that we form. That's part of our love. And so he said what they've studied, and even in my own research where I've studied this, is I found that after a loss, there's not much research where we can say 100% of people, but actually in almost every study, and this is such a beautiful factor about legacy. And for those of you who do have an illness right now who are attending, I pray that this is of some comfort as well to you to know that even in my own study, 100% of the participants still maintained a bond with their loved one who died. And in almost every study on continuing bonds that has been done, it's like 96, 98, 100%. Now this changes shape over time. So for example, in my study, and even in the National Alliance for Grieving Children study, a lot of them remembered their loved one by looking at photographs, or maybe baking Rice Krispie treats because that was your favorite thing to bake with the person, or watching videos. This is where the legacy videos come in so prominently, I think. One of the things I found in my study that speaks to some of these teenagers who aren't necessarily communicating openly, in my study, recalling memories, which was more of this internal expression, it was where they were kind of like thinking about their loved one. That was one of the most common in teenagers, but the least common in their parents. In their parents, they talked about it aloud to other people. Isn't that interesting? So that's why sometimes in our families, we have this rub of like, well, why won't he, my son, my daughter won't talk about it, but I want to talk about it. Or the teenager will say, all my dad does is talk about it, and I don't want to talk about it right now. So just because the people in our homes aren't talking about it doesn't mean they're not thinking about it, and doesn't mean they're not affected by it. And that's where we want to keep the lines of communication open. So are there any questions so far that I can answer? And then what I want to do is give you an illustration about love and about our hearts, and how the people that we love remain in our hearts forever. So I want to draw that for you in just a moment. And then I'll show you a really cool family activity that you can do together. Okay. So before I draw this, you have to know that I'm informed by this idea of reconciliation. So sometimes when you hear people say, get over it, right? I don't talk about that because I don't think we get over or ignore or forget, because I don't think that's how love works. I also think that love is complicated and dynamic and messy. At least most all the relationships I've ever been in, right? Friendships, it doesn't matter, they're complex. And so I believe that our grief is as well. And so reconciliation is defined as the process of finding a way to make two different ideas or contrasting truths to exist at the same time. Okay, the process of finding a way to make two different ideas or beliefs exist to be true at the same time. This is the and, right, that we talk about so much. It's yes. For example, yes, someone in our family is living with an illness that is devastating us at times and causes much sorrow. And I can have hope and joy and meaning at the same time. Now, sometimes it's different hours of the day, different days of the week. Sometimes it feels like the same exact moment, if you've ever experienced this. Or yes, I've experienced the death of someone that I loved and my life is forever changed. And I can still invite hope and joy and meaning and love. It's an and. It's not a waiting for this part to go away so I can have this over here. And that's a lot of times what we do in our culture. We say, well, when this ends, I'm going to be happy again. When this is over, then this will happen. And that's not really what life is it? It's more of this reconciliation. We reconcile what's going on. It's what's happening right now in our country amid a pandemic, or the world, really. You know, we're having to say, okay, yes, I can. Still, I can have this pandemic be true, and I can still somehow find joy in the middle of this. It doesn't mean we don't have to adapt. So as I draw this, I want you to think about it, really knowing that we are, our loss, I believe love is always a part of our lives, and I don't think that we lose our love, right? I think our love stays with us. And so Carol, yes, we will have Inheritance of Hope text these to you. I see your question. So I'm going to draw this for you. Let me first provide you this information. I started drawing this because one day I was helping a young woman whose parent, one of her parents had died a couple years prior, and her other parent was considering remarriage or dating again, really. And she really was struggling with that concept and that idea. And so I was trying to explain to her, she really felt like, the way she said it to me is, I feel like I'm going to be cheating on my mom if I do anything with her. And this woman actually was very supportive of her. She was, I mean, she talked about her mother all the time. This woman just really was integrating that loss and saying, if I'm going to be in this family, we're going to have pictures up of your mom. It was beautiful. But she said, it just feels like I'm cheating. And so I kept trying to talk to her about it. She said, I just don't understand how she's not taking my mom's place. And so I thought, well, let me try to draw this for you. And I've since drawn it for a lot of families. I want to draw it for you too, because I think if there's a way you can help your children, and I've seen families do this, actually a lot of people who are living with illness have done this for their families as well as part of their legacy. And so I want to draw this for you real quick and show you how I explain it to people. So let's pretend, right, like this is a little girl that I worked with who was 6 years old, and her daddy had died a couple years prior. And so let me draw, oops, okay, here we go. Let me draw this for you. So what I did is I drew a heart for her, and I said, okay, you know, what do we keep in our hearts? And so of course we respond with things like, we keep our love and our memories and our time together in our hearts, right? That's what we keep in our hearts. So we had that conversation, and then I said, okay, tell me who you love. And so she starts telling me who she loved. And so let's say, for example, right, she definitely said her daddy. So we'll put daddy here. And then she had a spot for her mom. We'll put mommy here. She also had a brother. We'll just call him brother for now for confidentiality reasons, right? And then she actually had a kitty cat that she really loved. So I'm going to put her cat here. And then she had another cat here that had died that year. Actually, her cat died just a few weeks before her daddy did. And so we're going to put this other cat here. And then she told me about her grandma. So we'll call grandma G-Ma. And then she had grandpa. Now I draw as many people as kids have, all right, whoever they have. And so she had all these people that she loved. And so I said, do you know what happens when someone in our life dies? What happens to their section of our hearts? And she thought about it for a little minute and she said, I'm not really sure. And I said, well, what happens is that section really becomes shaded in, okay? And what that means is it becomes permanent. And this is really good conversation too for kids about boundaries, because we have to teach children that we can invite people into our hearts. You know, it's not like anybody can just come take a spot in our hearts. We have to give people space in our hearts and invite them in. And so I said, this part becomes shaded in. Look at that. I said, and what's here, right, is all of the love and the memories and everything else that we had with your daddy. And that is now permanent. It can absolutely never, ever, 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 ever go away. And it can't be taken by anybody else. Nobody else can take that spot because now it's permanent. But we have a little dilemma here, right? I mean, this little girl's heart is full and she was 6 years old. And I said, you're going to grow a lot. I mean, there's a lot of things you might want to do in your life. Maybe there's a new friend at school, or maybe one day you want to get married. She was like, no, right? So all these things, you might want to meet new people. I said, but what are we going to do because your heart is full? She said, I don't know. And I said, well, this is the really cool thing about the human heart, right? We were created with a capacity to grow in love. It's the greatest gift we were given by God, right? So I said, our hearts can grow bigger. And we can allow new people to become a part of our lives if we want. So maybe, oops, let me go back. Go back. No, wrong way. Hang on. It's going rogue. Let me go back. Sorry. Oh, it deleted it. Would you believe that? Maybe it'll be back here. It's back. Yay. Okay, I fixed my own problem. So I said maybe, right? And I didn't shade in. I forgot to shade in over here this little cat, but we did shade in this cat spot too, okay? Because she'd had two recent losses. And so I said, if you choose, maybe you meet a new friend in school next year, and this new friend is really important to you, and you decide you want the new friend to have a place in your heart. Or maybe one day you decide to get married and you want that person to go right here in your heart. You want a spot for them too. And I said, and so let's say in this case that mom's boyfriend's name, or it was a friend at this point. Let's say his name is Bob, right? So I said, and if you choose, you can give Bob a place in your heart as well. But it's not possible for Bob to take your daddy's spot. No one will ever take your father's spot in your heart. His love and memories will always be there for you. Now, if you decide that you want to have new memories with Bob, they can be over here, right? New memories. I know you can't see what I'm writing, but you get the gist. And love, right? They can be there, but they can never take the place of your father. No one ever will. And so I've used this as well, by the way, to help families with divorce loss also, to help them see that inviting new people into our hearts isn't cheating, and it's absolutely not forgetting. It's never forgetting, because the love and the memories is always there. So I hope that helps you all a little bit as you're processing this with your children. And, as you're continuing to love in your own lives as well, and love amid a lot of the challenges that you're facing. Now, this other activity is one of my very favorites that you can work on as a family. This is called From Broken to Whole. And so as you see, this is a clay pot, okay? I've given you an up-close picture of this. It's about this big. This isn't like one of the ginormous ones. It's about this big. You can go get these at Lowe's or really any craft store. Not craft store. You're not gonna, well, you might be able to get one at a craft store. You need the glue that I'm about to tell you about from a craft store. But whatever home improvement store or place that sells plants, that's where you can get these clay pots. And what you do, if you notice, and you might have to move your screen around a little bit to see it, but what you're gonna notice here is that this pot has been broken into about 5 or 6 very large chunks with some small little shards that are missing, and you'll notice that. And what it is now is we have families on the inside. And so this is really actually a great activity to use in the middle of an illness journey, or also for loss. What we do is kids and adults in the family, they write on the inside what has been hard for them on the journey, things that have been challenging or difficult for them to process, okay? And then on the outside, we write, and we just use Sharpies, or you can get those paint pens. We write what has been helpful for us or ways in which we have grown or healed along our journey. And then what we do is we put the pot back together. Now, you can cheat and use a hot glue gun, but I'm going to recommend you don't do that. I'm going to recommend you get something called Aleene's Tacky Glue. Aleens, Aleene's Tacky Glue. It has to be a little bit tacky. I mean, you got to let it sit there for a second and then hold it together. But what this is as a family, you work together to put this clay pot back together, to make it from broken, as you're feeling as a family, to whole. It is not as easy as it looks. It can provoke emotion, frustrating emotions. I recommend that you wear a mask so that you can have your friends come over and help you with this right now during COVID as well, because guess why? We need to teach our children that we have to rely on support too. And sometimes there are things in our lives that are too big for us to do alone. And we might need support from people around us. And so it might be that we need our neighbors or our friends or other people who are going through similar circumstances to help us put this back together. But I want you to notice what happens when you see this clay pot. You're going to see, like I mentioned, some of the cracks at the bottom. And we've had to put a plastic liner in it to actually have a plant be able to grow in there. But just like this clay pot, we too are different as a result of our loss. We are forever changed. The grief process does change us, but it does not mean that we cannot be whole. This is an illustration that yes, we are forever changed. The crack there at the bottom, right by where it says daddy, that you will notice, that crack is always going to be there. We lost that little piece and it will never get put back again, right? But this pot is beautiful and it can still hold new life. It can hold a plant, it can still thrive. There's a Japanese tradition called kintsugi. I don't know if anybody's aware of this, and if I mispronounced it or I'm totally wrong about it, I actually have, I'm gonna show you, you're in my guest bedroom, now you get to see all of it, but here we go. This is an illustration of it. And so the old tradition is really that broken things, they take broken pottery, and then they put it back together with this beautiful gold dust and powder. And really it's to say that broken things should not be discarded. And they actually put the gold here to highlight the cracks, because we are richer, more loving, more compassionate human beings when we've gone through things and when we felt the cracks of life. So I want to say that to you all as well. Just because your children are going through something extraordinary right now does not mean that they will be changed for the worse. And a lot of families worry about that. Your children are given an opportunity to grow through what's happening to them, to grow into humans who love well, who extend more kindness to others, who are more compassionate. And I think after the past year, we know the world needs more humans like that. We need more people who are compassionate. So again, this is not, right? Reconciliation is the process of finding a way to make two separate ideas or truths exist to be true at the same time. We can have deep sorrow and we can have great joy, sometimes even on the same day, and sometimes even in the same hour. So I want to see, I have a video of a grief camp that I can show you. It's uplifting, but a little bit of a tearjerker, so I don't necessarily want to make you do it if you don't want to see it. It's really great. It's of our camp that we do here. I know we have a Lakeland family on that we had to cancel this year because of COVID, but I can show you that as a resource if you'd like for your children, so that you can see different grieving children. It's about 4 minutes long, 3 or 4 minutes long, and that might motivate you to look for some of these opportunities in your own communities. So I have that to show you. I also have a few minutes to address any questions that you might have. I don't think I've seen any lately come up in the chat, but if there are any questions, I can show that. So I wish I could launch. I can't launch a poll now. It's too late. It never lets you relaunch an old poll. But to ask you what you would prefer, but I tried to kind of buffer it and leave myself a few more minutes at the end to see. So if you would like, if there aren't any questions, I would be more than willing to share the camp video. Before I do that, I have to stop my share screen because I've got to start it back so that you can hear the music, and you can see some of the kids who are impacted. So I want real quick, before I share it though, I want to read you. This is a liturgy that actually, I know Andrew Peterson is, I believe, helping us tonight. And this is something that he actually did a book called Every Moment Holy through, he had a part of it. Maybe he just did the foreword. This is the book. They're actually coming out with a new one in February 2021 for embracing grief and joy and sorrow. It's called Every Moment Holy 2, Death, Grief, and Hope. So he didn't write this, but definitely his organization is a part of this. And so I want to read you real quick before I show you that video. That way, if you don't have an interest in the video, you can certainly hop off. And if you want to see the 3-minute video, it really is a great video. I think you'll enjoy it, and it'll help you see kids who are going through some of what your kids are going through as well. But I want to read you this liturgy because I want you to know you're doing extraordinary work with your children, all of you, even for being here. And so this is a liturgy for embracing both joy and sorrow, a liturgy that I pray over all of you and your families. It says this: "Do not be distant, O Lord, lest I find this burden of loss too heavy and shrink from the necessary experience of my grief. Do not be distant, O Lord, lest I become so mired in yesterday's hurts that I miss entirely the living gifts this day might hold. Let me neither ignore my pain, pretending all is okay when it isn't, nor coddle and magnify my pain so that I dull my capacity to experience all that remains good in this life. For joy that denies sorrow is neither hard-won nor true nor eternal. It is not real joy at all. And sorrow that refuses to make space for the return of joy and hope in the end becomes nothing more than a temple for the worship of my own woundedness. So give me strength, O God, to feel this grief deeply, never to hide my heart from it. And give me also hope enough to remain open to surprising encounters with joy. Amidst the pain that lades these days, give me courage, O Lord, courage to live them fully, to love and to allow myself to be loved, to remember, grieve, and honor what was, to live with thanksgiving in what is, and to invest in the hope of what will be. Be at work gilding these long heartbreaks with the advent of new joys, good friendships, true fellowships, unexpected delights. Remind me again and again of your goodness, your presence, your promises. For this is who we are, a people of the promise, a people shaped in the image of God whose very being generates all joy in the universe, yet who also weeps and grieves its brokenness. So we, your children, are also at liberty to lament our losses, even as we simultaneously rejoice in the hope of their coming restoration. Let me learn now, O Lord, to do this as naturally as the inhale and exhale of a single breath, to breathe out sorrow, to breathe in joy, to breathe out lament, to breathe in hope, to breathe out pain, to breathe in comfort, to breathe out sorrow, and to breathe in joy. In one hand, I grasp the burden of my grief, while with the other, I reach for the hope of grief's redemption. And here, between the tension of the two, between the was and what will be, in the very is of now, let my heart be surprised by, shaped by, warmed by, remade by the same joy that forever wells within and radiates from your heart, oh God. I want to see, I know I had a question in how much time do we encourage a teen son to spend, how much do we encourage a teen son to spend time with a diagnosed parent? Beautiful question. I tell him a lot that I don't want him to have regrets later. At what point do I stop? Yeah, everybody tries to protect themselves in different ways. And so when our kids do try to stay away from a diagnosed parent, I think sometimes it's because it's just a lot for them to process and it's hard. I think it's important, if you've been honest about the illness, including the prognosis, to give them that space to really step away when they need to. This is common. Sometimes we actually see this in diagnosed parents, that they start to separate and pull back a little bit. And so that's okay. I think, Amy, as long as you've told them, listen, I don't know how many days or hours you're going to have here. Is there something you need to say? Is there something that you need to do? Sometimes kids will actually write letters instead. Sometimes they'll say, sometimes it's just uncomfortable. And it's hard and sad for them to be around the person. And so sometimes they try just to avoid it. And also, we don't like unpleasant emotions. And so your son could be avoiding it because it is unpleasant and uncomfortable. And so what you might want to do is create opportunities for them to be around each other that might feel more natural. Sometimes it's just awkward if somebody is very sick or they can't spend as much time together, it can be awkward sometimes for a teenager. So creating those conditions where it makes it a little less awkward for that teenager would be helpful. And I don't mind if you have questions, Amy, I can even try to help you process some of that too later if it'll help, for sure. Any other questions? Okay, well, Christina, if you don't mind putting in those links again that you did earlier, or I think we saw, I should not be commenting. I think we saw that Inheritance of Hope is going to send those out, including this liturgy that I just shared from the Rabbit Room. This liturgy has just been so meaningful to me since they just released it October 28th. And kind of preparation for the book that they have coming out. And when I read it, I've shared it with a few people and I felt like it would be meaningful to share with you all. So I'm grateful that you appreciated that. If you need to hop off, that's fine. We have 15 minutes left. I would love to show you the Camp Braveheart video so that you can find out a little bit more about grief camps. And Joy, your question, yes, actually on that link, the National Alliance for Grieving Children link, it's going to link you to every children's grief center in the nation. And it's also going to, you'll say find a provider or find a center, and it'll also mention if there are any grief camps in your area. So without further ado, let me share for you this video of Camp Braveheart. Oh, hang on, I gotta get my screen back up. Where did I go? Of course, my keynote went out for a second. Okay, hang on. There we go. I'm getting it back for you. Okay. So now I can share it. You can see it. All right. So this is a grief camp, Camp Braveheart.
Do you dream of a home you never had? An innocence that you cannot get back. The pain is real. You can't erase it. Sooner or later, you have to face it down.
Camp Braveheart is a very special place because it's a place where children can come together and they can learn to find joy again after their grieving process. Once my daughter returned, I could tell she was lighter. Like she just found joy a little bit easier, and it really helped her healing process in losing her dad.
Kids come to Camp Braveheart to really experience a place where they can connect with other kids who have lost their parents and maybe their grandparents, anybody who's really special to them.
I see kids changing over the weekend. When they first get off the bus, they don't know what to think. They're nervous. After that first night, they're comfortable, they're opening up, they're having fun. We have great sessions with them to get them to talk about what's going on, and they feel comfortable, and then they just have a lot of fun.
We do lots of things that help them cope with their feelings that they're having, and we also help them to learn how to help their family members that don't come to Camp Braveheart. We do lots of group sharing with each other, so they realize that they're not the only one that feels that way, and that if somebody at their school is going through a loss, that they can help give back to what they got at Camp Braveheart.
When I lost my brother, I didn't have the social support to let me know that it's okay and I'm not alone. That's why I volunteer here.
I lost my mom. She died because her heart stopped beating. It's been great to talk to other kids that has lost their loved ones too.
I lost my brother. He passed away in a car crash about 2 years ago.
The loved one I lost was my father 9 months ago and my best friend a year ago.
Feel relief in talking about what happened and letting it off my chest.
We all know as adults that loss is universal and that everybody goes through it. But when you're a child and you lose somebody who's so important to you, you feel like you're the only one. And here at Camp Braveheart, there are over 100 kids. So they've all gone through something just as tough as you have. And I think for children, and from young children all the way to high schoolers, it's nice to know you're part of a larger community and that they don't feel any differently than you do. They hurt like you do, but they also can have fun like you do. So it's really a great community of support. And I think that's why parents and guardians should really think about letting their children come. It's not just fun, it really is a great healing place.
Camp Braveheart illustrates the concept of reconciliation. You saw the kids experience some of the sorrow, and you also saw them experiencing great, overwhelming joy. Loss is not the end for our children. It is not the end for us. There is hope. There are people who care. There is support. And you are playing a role in that by bringing your families to this retreat this weekend. So it has been an honor for me to share this hour and a half with you. I pray that it was uplifting to you, that you've been able to get some resources, hopefully, to help your children. Keep doing the amazing work that you're doing with your families. Thank you so much for sharing this time. I'll stay on just for a couple minutes before I close this out. And I'll see some of you tomorrow in my last session. And I thank you again. This has been an extraordinary opportunity and a gift to share with your family. So thank you so much for having me, and y'all have a great evening. Enjoy all of the events. I believe there's a family game night that I hear has prizes. I think Stephen knows about that. And make a Giving Tuesday page. Stephen wants us to do that. I need to do that. I have forgotten to do that so far. And yes, family game night and photo booth. Make sure you do a photo booth with your families. So thank you so much. I'll see you all tomorrow, and some of you this evening. Have an excellent night. And I'll see you later. Bye, guys.